My name is Reagan Kessler. I'm 31 years old, and I still remember the exact sound my father's voice made when he said those words. This is our daughter. She handles the catering for tonight. The room laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Worse than that, a comfortable one, like it was normal, like it was expected. I was standing in my parents' dining room, holding a serving tray I hadn't asked to hold, wearing a dress I picked out myself for Thanksgiving dinner, and my own father had just introduced me to 14 relatives as the hired help. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, tray in my hands, while my Aunt Carol smiled at me and said, "Oh, she's very professional looking," like I was a piece of furniture that had been arranged nicely for the evening. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I got angry, I didn't. I got quiet. And in my family, quiet was always more dangerous than anyone realized. But to understand why I stood up that night and said what I said, you have to go back. Because this didn't start at Thanksgiving. It started 4 years earlier, in a hospital room, with a piece of paper nobody thought I'd ever see. I grew up in Millbrook, a small town outside Harrisburg, in a house my grandfather built with his own hands, back when land out there was cheap, and nobody thought twice about a man laying his own foundation. My parents, Daniel and Ruth Kessler, ran a modest hardware store downtown for almost 30 years. It smelled like sawdust and motor oil, and as a kid I used to sit behind the register doing homework, while my father helped customers pick out the right size bolts. My older brother Preston was the golden child. That's not an exaggeration, that's just how the house was arranged. Captain of his college lacrosse team, then a regional manager at an insurance firm downtown, married to a woman named Vivian, who wore her family's old money like perfume, applied a little too heavy, noticeable the second she walked into a room. I was the responsible one. That was my role in the family, the one nobody assigned me but everyone expected me to play anyway, the way you inherit your mother's height or your father's temper. When my mother needed rides to appointments, I drove her, even on my lunch breaks. When the store's bookkeeping got behind because my father never trusted computers, I fixed it on weekends for free, sitting at that same counter with a calculator and a stack of receipts. When Preston forgot Mom's birthday 2 years running, I was the one who quietly bought the gift and put both our names on the card so nobody had to feel embarrassed at dinner. "You're just built different, Reagan," my father used to say, usually right after Preston had let something slide. "Preston needs help, you don't." I used to think that was a compliment. It took me years to understand it was actually an assignment. I worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company in Harrisburg. Not glamorous. Not what my parents bragged about at church potlucks. Preston's promotions got announced at every family gathering like press releases, complete with my mother repeating his new title twice in case anyone missed it. My work got a polite nod and a quick change of subject, usually towards something Preston had done that same month. I didn't resent it. Not at first. I told myself families have roles, and mine was steady, and steady was fine. Steady paid the bills. Steady didn't need applause. Then my grandfather, Walter Kessler, had a stroke. He was the one person in that family who never made me feel smaller than I was. Every summer growing up, I'd sit with him on his porch while he drank black coffee from a chipped mug and told me stories about the war, about the store he almost opened instead of the farm he ended up running, about fairness, how he believed in it the way some people believe in scripture. He told me more than once that the house, the land, and what was left of his savings would be split fairly between his grandchildren one day. Not because he loved me more than Preston, because he believed fairness was something you did on purpose, not something that happened by accident. I sat with him in that hospital room for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of fluorescent lighting and vending machine coffee, and a heart monitor that I learned to read better than the nurses gave me credit for. Preston visited twice. Once with flowers he clearly bought at the gas station downstairs. My parents visited every day for the first week, then slowly stopped, citing the store, citing stress, citing everything except the truth, which was that watching him fade was hard, and it was easier to avoid something hard than to sit inside it. I didn't avoid it. I held his hand while a nurse changed his IV. I read him the newspaper because he liked knowing what was happening in the world even when he could barely turn his head to look at me. I learned to recognize which silences meant he was tired and which ones meant he was scared, and I never once let him see me cry in that room, not until I was out in the hallway with the door shut behind me. 3 days before he died, he asked me to get a notary. I didn't understand why then. I understand now. That wasn't even the strangest part of that year. The strangest part came 4 months later, when the family lawyer called a meeting to go over the will, and my parents told me not to bother coming. "It's mostly formalities," my mother said over the phone, her voice light, like she was telling me not to bother bringing an umbrella. "Your father and Preston will handle it." I went anyway. I sat in the back of that lawyer's office in a gray suit that didn't quite fit anymore, one I'd bought for a cousin's wedding 2 years earlier, and I listened to a document that would eventually blow this entire family apart, though none of us understood that yet, sitting there under those cheap fluorescent lights with a pot of stale coffee going cold on the side table. My grandfather's estate wasn't small. Beyond the house, there was a paid-off rental property in Lancaster he'd bought decades earlier when nobody wanted it, and a savings account that had quietly grown for years because the man never spent money on anything but seed catalogs and coffee. The total came to just over $600,000. The will split it 3 ways. My father got the house, Preston got the Lancaster property, I got the savings account. My parents' faces didn't move. Preston's did, just slightly. A tightening around the eyes, gone as fast as it appeared, but I saw it because I'd spent 31 years learning to read that family's faces the way other people read weather patterns. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Because 2 weeks later, my father sat me down at the kitchen table with a folder and a voice that sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in the truck on the way home. "Your grandfather wasn't well those last few months," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We think it's best if we handle the account together. For the family. Until things settle." I asked him what that meant. "We'll put it in a joint account. Preston needs help with a down payment. You don't have those kinds of expenses right now." I remember looking at that folder. Bank forms, already filled out, missing only my signature at the bottom, like they'd been so confident I'd sign that they hadn't even waited to ask first. "Family takes care of family," my mother said, sliding a pen across the table like it was the most natural sentence in the world. Like she was offering me a napkin instead of asking me to give away $600,000 my grandfather had specifically left in my name. I didn't sign it that day. I told them I needed time to think. What I actually did was call the lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Denise Okafor, and ask her one simple question. Was there any legal reason I had to share that inheritance with anyone? There wasn't. The account was solely in my name. My grandfather had made sure of that, deliberately, according to Denise, who mentioned almost in passing that he'd asked her several specific questions about ownership structure in his final competent weeks. Questions that made a lot more sense to me later than they did in that moment. I didn't tell my parents I knew that. I just said I needed a few more weeks, and in those few weeks, I watched my family's mask slip in ways I'd never let myself notice before, or maybe ways I'd noticed for years and simply refused to name. My mother started calling more often, always with the same undertone dressed up as casual conversation. "Preston's stressed about the house payment. Vivian's been asking questions. It would mean so much to your father. You know how proud he is." Not once did she ask how I was doing, holding a windfall I never expected, grieving a man who'd been more of a real parent to me than either of them had managed some years. Preston called exactly once. He didn't ask about the money directly, because that wasn't his style. He talked about his mortgage rate, his daughter's private school tuition, the pressure of keeping up appearances in Vivian's social circle, the golf club dues that had gone up again. Then, almost as an afterthought, dropped in the way you drop something you've been holding on to the whole call. "It'd be nice if you thought about the family as a whole, Reg, not just yourself." Myself. As if wanting to keep what my grandfather explicitly left me, in writing, with a notary present, was some kind of selfish act. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it, more than they ever knew. I thought about every birthday I'd covered, every ride to the pharmacy, every late night doing my mother's bookkeeping at that same kitchen table, while Preston posted vacation photos from Cancun with captions about how blessed he was. I didn't sign the joint account form. I quietly moved the money into a new account at a different bank, one none of them had ever used or even heard of, and I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. That was the hidden secret nobody in my family knew I was sitting on. Not the money itself. They knew about that, obviously. What they didn't know was that I'd already spoken to Denise about something else my grandfather had done in his final weeks. something buried in an amendment to the will that hadn't been read aloud in that office, because it wasn't part of the public record yet. It was a letter, addressed to me, sealed, with instructions that Denise only handed over if my family tried to interfere with the inheritance within 1 year of his passing. I didn't open it right away. Some part of me was afraid of what it said, afraid it would confirm something I already suspected but didn't want to be true. I carried it around in my bag for 3 weeks like a stone I couldn't put down, taking it out sometimes just to look at my name and his handwriting on the envelope. Then Thanksgiving happened. My mother had asked me 2 weeks earlier if I'd help out with the dinner, since I was so organized. I said yes, thinking I'd be setting the table, maybe helping cook a side dish, like every other year of my life. What I didn't know was that my parents had told the extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't seen in over a year, that they'd hired a caterer for the night, a small professional operation, to take the pressure off Ruth's shoulders for once, so everyone could just relax and enjoy the day. I found out I was that caterer when I walked in the door with a dish I'd made myself, and my father took it out of my hands, set it on the counter without a word of thanks, and said, "Perfect timing. Go ahead and start plating things in the dining room." I thought it was a joke. Then Aunt Carol walked past me and said, "Oh, you must be with the catering company. Everything smells wonderful." I looked at my mother. She didn't correct her. That's when my father said it, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "This is our daughter. She handles the catering for tonight." 14 people laughed. My mother smiled and refilled someone's wine glass without missing a beat. Preston, sitting at the head of the table in my grandfather's old chair, didn't even look up from his phone. I want to tell you I said something brilliant in that moment. I didn't. I set the tray down on the sideboard, walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub for 4 minutes, staring at my own hands, trying to figure out how a family could do this to someone and still call it love at the same dinner table. Then I remembered the letter. It was in my car. I walked out to the driveway, sat in the front seat with the dome light on, and finally opened it. My grandfather's handwriting filled 2 pages, shaky near the end but still unmistakably his. He wrote that he'd watched, for years, how the family treated me, the errands, the invisible labor, the way my accomplishments got folded into silence, while Preston's got framed and hung on the wall, so to speak. He wrote that he split the estate the way he did on purpose, not to create conflict, but because he trusted me to be the only one who wouldn't need to be told to do the right thing. And then he wrote something that became the sentence that repeated in my head for the rest of that night. The same sentence he used to say to me on that porch, except now it meant something entirely different than it ever had before. "You were always the responsible one, Reagan. Don't let them make you the only one who pays for it." I sat in that car for a long time, engine off, hands cold on the steering wheel. Then I walked back inside. The dining room had gone quiet, the way rooms do when people sense something's coming and don't know what. I stood at the head of the table, right across from Preston, right beside the chair my grandfather used to sit in. "I want to thank you all for such a warm welcome tonight," I said. My voice was steady, steadier than I expected it to be. Since I'm apparently the caterer, I figure I should share a little about the company. Nobody laughed this time. "Kessler Family Holdings," I said, "sole proprietor, started with an inheritance my grandfather left specifically to me, in my name, with legal documentation that neither of my parents nor my brother has ever disputed in writing, because they know they'd lose. An inheritance some people in this family have spent the last 4 months trying to convince me to hand over, using words like, family takes care of family, right up until tonight, when apparently family also means introducing me to relatives as hired help, so nobody asks questions about why I wasn't invited as a daughter." My mother's face went white. My father set down his fork. "Reagan," he started. "I'm not finished," I said, and something in my voice made him stop mid-sentence. "I have a letter from Grandpa Walter, written 3 weeks before he died. I'd like to read one line of it, if that's all right with everyone eating my catering tonight." I read them the line. The room didn't laugh at that one either. Then I told them the rest. Denise Okafor had already been notified, weeks earlier, about the pressure my parents put on me to sign over the account. Under the terms of the will's amendment, any documented attempt by beneficiaries to coerce or interfere with another beneficiary's inheritance within the first year would trigger a full reevaluation of the estate distribution, meaning my father's house and Preston's rental property could both be legally challenged and reassigned, with me named as the primary beneficiary of the amended terms. I hadn't wanted to use it. I'd been holding on to that letter hoping I'd never need it, but sitting in that car, reading my grandfather's handwriting, I realized something. I wasn't protecting the family by staying quiet. I was protecting the pattern that let them treat me this way in the first place. "I'm not taking the house or the property," I told them, and I meant every word of it. That was never what I wanted, but I am done being the responsible one who quietly absorbs whatever this family decides to hand me. If anyone contacts Denise again about that account, she has instructions to move forward with the amendment. That's not a threat. That's just what Grandpa wrote. I picked my coat up off the back of a chair, and I looked at my mother, standing there with the wine bottle still in her hand. "Thank you for a lovely evening," I said. "Merry Thanksgiving." Then I left. I didn't get a call that night. I got one 3 days later from my father, who didn't apologize so much as attempt to negotiate, asking if we could put this behind us. I told him I needed time. I meant it, more than I'd meant almost anything I'd said to him in years. Preston didn't call at all. Vivian sent one text, 3 words long. That was unnecessary. I didn't respond. It's been 8 months since that dinner. I still talk to my mother, though it's different now. Careful, thinner, honest in a way it never was before. The way conversations get when both people know something can't be unsaid. My father and I are still finding our way back to something, slowly, in small conversations that don't try to erase what happened. Preston and I haven't spoken since Thanksgiving. I don't know if we will, and for the first time in my life, I've made peace with not knowing. I used part of the inheritance to leave my job and start something of my own, a small logistics consulting practice, the kind of work I was always good at, but never got credit for at home. I named it after my grandfather, quietly, on the paperwork nobody else will ever read. Sometimes I think about that dining room, about the sound of 14 people laughing at a joke that wasn't a joke at all. And I think about the fact that it took a dead man's letter to make me believe I was allowed to stop absorbing everything my family didn't want to carry themselves. I wasn't the waitress that night. I never was. I was just the only one in that family who ever showed up to actually serve something that mattered. And it took losing my grandfather to finally understand that showing up isn't the same thing as being seen.